point that we're not completely poo-pooing the gear that we have, right? The safety equipment that we have. Because what the gear allows us to do is to push certain elements of the art further than we can in traditional play, right? I can't actually connect a cut to Eric's head because I like Eric and I want to be able to train again next week. I don't need him going to the hospital. But that being said, there are certain things that we can and can't do that the gear allows us to examine further. So, for example, the duplaren, right? So a duplaren, right, I provoke to his head, he offsets, and as he does, I cut in behind his sword to his head, right? A really crucial element of the duplaren is that I'm using the pressure of this bind as he offsets me to turn this sword into his head. It's a cut into the side of his head that's using the pressure from his sword to generate that power. Well, that's a little bit tricky to do when your opponent doesn't have a mask on. If you take your mask off for a moment. It's not to say that this is impossible, and you'll actually see when we were doing some traditional free play, I had a duplaren, but I leveraged it up here. You saw Eric acknowledge that his head is open. If we become very, very skilled and advanced, there is a type of play or a situation where I may be able to just lay the flat on Eric's head. Perhaps this is why we see in the contemporary images they're wearing these big poofy hats oftentimes. It's there. However, can we really push ourselves and pressure test some of these examples, right? Winding thrusts to the face. I'm not going to do that in traditional free play, right? We may be in a wind and I may try and take an opening out here, but that's as close as I'm going to get to Eric. And ideally, right, he's going to see this and that's it, that's where it stops. I'm not driving my point through his head. However, if we put the gear on, we can work some of these things, right? And we can take these thrusts, these cuts, these windings, these techniques to their full extension. So the gear is good and helpful. What we're trying to get at is most of us only ever train with the gear on, and we're missing a huge component of the art that the people who are writing this down didn't have this gear. This isn't how they were training. They probably wish they did, right? Because they could take some of these things to further extension. So we're kind of lucky that we do have the gear, but we have to be mindful that there are some artifacts that the gear lends into what we're doing that we just have to be mindful of. And the easiest way to do it is to take it off and to fence as the manuals are describing.
Yeah. I think it's important to also just reiterate the fact that when that duplaren comes at my head, if we are both in traditional blossfechten gear as we are now, if Shane leverages that at my head, he can, if he's controlled enough, as he mentioned, turn that edge and put the flat to my head. Now I've taken a couple small flat smacks to my head. It's not going to knock you out as long as this person's controlled. So I've had the sword where I've run into the sword, and that just goes to show you, oh, it was a touch. Had he turned the edge, it would have been way more devastating. So that control, again, is absolutely vital. And when you get to a point where you're very confident and comfortable with someone, it becomes rather amazing to discover what you can see in the art as expressed in the gear that they wore regarding the usefulness of fencing in traditional blossfechten gear this way, because you start to understand the art in a very different manner. And to highlight this idea, I want to point out a passage that's in Michael Chittister's book where he translates 3227A. In the beginning of the book, he actually puts the zettel, which doesn't appear in this fashion in 3227A, but he puts it at the beginning as reference anyway. So here's his translation of the zettel. I'm going to read a little bit before the indes piece, which is the part I want to emphasize. Before and after, these two things, which are to all arts a wellspring. Likewise, there is weak and strong, and the word within, which is his translation of indes. Remember hereon. You can learn then, with skill, to work and defend. And that defend piece is the whole point. You can learn to work and to defend. Now, to defend means I feel a threat that's coming at me. Otherwise, there's nothing to defend against. So that threat is the key. Now, oftentimes when we study indes, we have to, when we have our masks on, for example, and our gloves on, we have to perceive a threat based on sight alone. And this is the issue potentially if all we do is train with all that gear on. We lose the sense and feeling of a threat because once that mask leaves our head and our head is open, blossen, then we perceive threat in a wholly different way. It's not just visual, we actually feel it. There's fooling there. So we're going to demonstrate this. So very simply, we did this in one video already, but we're going to reiterate this here. Shane's not going to just move when he feels a threat. He's going to react to the threat. So I'm going to come in, not fast, not quick, but I want to see if I can make him move. So only move if you feel you need to.
Just parry?
So yeah, just parry. We don't have anything on.
Yep.
When I cut, some of the cuts are going to be too far out.
Sure.
Some will be farther in.
Sure.
So when you feel you need to move, you move.
Yep.
Notice nothing's there. There it was. Do it again. Now, Shane, can you describe the feeling that you had there?
It's visual's a part of it, but it's beyond that. There's even an intention I can just read from your action. You know, deer fly in your head. It's summertime.
The perils of working outside.
Yeah, right. So there's just a feeling as to it's not even just. It's hard to grasp. It's the intention of my opponent that I can read, right, and that I feel. It is measured, but there's just this raw innate that my hands are moving before I've necessarily decided anything. And a lot of this will come with experience too, as you get more comfortable with measure, right, and you know which measure is safe and what is not. But even still, as they start to brush that margin of danger, you just move to defend yourself. You don't have to process it.
Right.
And hopefully we're training to defend ourselves efficiently, right? Which is why we train the Meisterhound, we train these Indes techniques, right? So that when they're called upon, they're coming out and there's no need to process. But it's an automatic response that's just inherent in us, right? And we're just training to try and make that more efficient. But.
Right. So there's one piece of this I want to really highlight from what Shane said, is that you don't have to process it. And the process is the thinking part. That mostly comes down to when you see something happen, you're making an active decision, processing, to interact with that. Well, when there's a real threat, you feel it. It's in your body, not necessarily in your eyes. As Shane said, it's partly in your eyes, but you feel the threat coming. And one of the ways you can know this for sure is take someone who's never done this before. Don't use steel, because you want them to come back. But take a foam sword, a boffer, and don't give them any gear. And simply ask them to react when they feel the need to preserve themselves so that they don't get hit. And it's very simple. As Shane steps back and I come launching at him, he has to move. So again, we're going to show that in Des motion, because Shane is going to feel that sense of danger. So as I work back here and cut towards him, he has to react. He has to react. And that's the key. It's because not only does he see it, he feels the threat. And what I'm trying to argue is, in a sense really, is once we put those masks on, it cuts down or mutes that feeling quite a bit. And when you have that muted sense of danger, it's actually hard to learn how to visually perceive when you should move and when you shouldn't. But as soon as that feeling of danger is very palpable, it becomes obvious. Yeah. You know exactly when to move. And so this is one of the benefits of fencing in traditional blossfechten gear rather than putting on the helmet.